Welcome to another episode of Creative Tech Talks. Today's session is presented by Jonathan and Rizan. Yeah, so Jonathan is an ATL at Tapes. He has 7+ years of experience in the software industry, and his interests are in sim racing, motorsport, and mobile technologies. Rizan, on the other hand, is an SEC at the same project, Tips, and he's into cricket and .NET technologies. And girls, I also hear. Okay, so let me introduce, let me get Rizan to start off with the presentation.
Okay, thank you, Kanchana. So good evening, everyone. So starting this tech talk, I'll be giving you a brief overview of Xamarin Forms, and then Jonathan will jump in with some live coding session. So let's start talking about Xamarin Forms. This is quite a broad area to speak about. So what we'll do is we will reduce the scope only to have an overview of Xamarin Forms, but we will just start from a ground to top level, like covering all what the necessary things that you should learn to get up and running with Xamarin Forms. So that means we also have to scope our audience. So our target audience is developers who are interested in starting using Xamarin Forms. Initially, you get this fear of using this technology because it's quite because you haven't used it. But what we intend is to help you brave this technology, and also anyone who wants to know what Xamarin Forms is, you can. This will also be a good session for you. So there are a few prerequisites if you're joining. It's good if you know C# and XAML because the coding session will be using these languages. Also, it will be good if you know some Mvvm design pattern because Xamarin Forms is has integrated this pattern in it. Also, because we are talking about mobile stuff, it's better to know some mobile paradigms. So this is what we will be learning today. So we got 8 separate areas which we will be focusing on in today's tech talk. So let's go one by one. So first, what's Xamarin Forms? So before talking about Xamarin Forms, we have to know what Xamarin is. So Xamarin is a platform for building predominantly Android and iOS apps using .NET. So this is a free and cross-platform SDK. So you can develop in Windows in Mac. And for Linux environments, though there is no direct support, you can still do it, but of course you'll have to go through some pain. So out in there, you can develop Android and iOS apps using. There are enough technologies to develop Android and iOS apps. So why bother learning Xamarin? So it's because Xamarin stands out with some of the key features it offers. So the first is, of course, because you can use .NET to develop these apps. It's really great news for .NET developers because you don't need to learn Java or Swift or any other programming languages to develop any of these mobile apps. So you can use .NET to develop these mobile apps. But the other benefit is though you develop these apps with .NET, there is no any setbacks. Like you still end up getting a native app. So that means it offers good performance. And one other benefit is that you can share as much as 60 to 90% of the code that you write for a single app in distributing among different platforms. So that's a great benefit that you get from Xamarin. So that's why it stands out. So Xamarin offers a couple of ways of developing apps. So the first is we can say Xamarin Native, and the other as Xamarin Forms, which we'll be talking today. So Xamarin Native differs to Xamarin Forms because it straightforwardly maps to the underlying technologies UI APIs. So that constrains Xamarin Native to limit the ability to share the UI code. On the other hand, Xamarin Forms has its own APIs for the views for the UI, so it helps Xamarin Forms share some more code, the UI code as well. So what technology to use? So you can use a simple benchmark for that. So it also depends on the app that you will be building. So if you are developing iOS apps and Android apps with like almost the same UI skin, then you have to go with Xamarin Forms. But if your UI skin for Android and iOS differs drastically for the same app, then you better go with Xamarin Native. So today our focus is on Xamarin Forms. So let's see how we can install this in our machine. So first, in Windows environment, the easiest way that we'll be discussing is using Visual Studio installer. So you just download it and follow the installation guidelines. And when you come to this screen, you should make sure that you tick this tile, mobile development with .NET, for an easier setting up of the SDK. So when it comes to the Mac environment, of course, if you are developing for iOS devices, then you need Xcode installed as well, and you also have to have an Apple ID for signing the code, which is required for iOS apps. So to set up the SDK is also similar to Windows. You have to download the Visual Studio for Mac ID and then follow the installation guidelines. And when you come to this screen, you make sure that you tick Android and iOS SDKs and start installing. Yeah, so that's about the installation, and let's look at the IDEs that we can use to develop Xamarin Forms apps. So for Windows environment, we get Visual Studio for Windows. There's a community edition which is free, and then there's this proprietary software, Rider for Windows. And for Mac environments, you still get Visual Studio for Mac, and then also Rider for Mac. So for Mac environments, I prefer Rider because it offers more than Visual Studio for Mac, but it's of course a proprietary software, you have to pay for it. So let's look at the solution structure of a Xamarin Forms project. So I will just jump into Visual Studio. So the procedure to create a new project is you just go and tap on create new project and look for mobile template, and you get this Xamarin Forms, and then click next. I'll just go with the default and make sure, and I'll prefer developing apps for both the platforms, so you can decide it here, and I will go with a blank template. So I'll create it. Okay, so this is, so once you create a Xamarin Forms solution, you get 3 projects that are listed here. So first, let's drill into the UI project. This is called the UI project, and this is a .NET Standard project which has where you have Xamarin Forms installed in it. So what we should focus on here is this app XAML class. This is the starting point of the Xamarin Forms app, and here you get 3 methods which defines which you can perform actions according to the life cycle of the mobile app, and also you get a main page property where you set the first screen, which we will be talking in the future, like in a while, and also there's this main page file, which is a view file in Xamarin Forms, and if you just drill open it, you can see there is an underlying C# file in it. So this XAML file depends on this C# file. It's called the code behind. The code behind goes in here. So that's the structure of the UI project, we call it. And then let's drill into the Android project. And there are 3 areas we should know. So this file Android manifest, we use this to define configurations for the Android app. And then the main activity is the starting point of the Android app. And you can also define some configuration in the attribute. And then this resources directory, this is where you set your application icons. Okay, so now let's drill into the iOS app. So in the iOS app, this file called info.plist is the file that you use to configure iOS configurations. And then you get this app delegate class, which is the starting point of the iOS app. So the iOS app starts from here. And then this asset catalog here is where you set the iOS application icons. So that's the basic structure of the solution. So let's move. So we also then Mvvm. It's really important if you have a good understanding of Mvvm design pattern. So because Xamarin Forms has Mvvm integrated, so here we will just have a briefing of it. So Mvvm is a separation of concerns design pattern. So we have 3 separations here. The view where you get the presentation stuff, and then the model where you hold the data, and then the view model where the business logic and stuff will be going. And then there is also some protocols between how each layer can communicate with each other. So the view can directly communicate with the view model, but the view model should not have any direct idea of the view. So having that in mind, let's try to understand Xamarin Forms in the way how it integrates this design pattern. So first, we'll have this divided into 3 areas. Like first, we'll look at only the view, and then the communication that's happening between the view and the view model, and then the data and service handling between the view model and the model. So we'll look how Xamarin Forms integrates these 3 areas. So let's proceed. So first, the view layer. So that's this. When it comes to view layer, first we should talk about the view controls. So view controls in Xamarin Forms is the view elements that you see on screen of your app. So view controls are divided into 4 areas in Xamarin Forms. So let's look at each of them. So the first is pages. Xamarin Form page is the screen of your app. The screen that is a page. So then there are layouts. So layouts help you position view elements within it. So there are 2 kinds of layouts in Xamarin Forms. One is only capable of placing one single view element in it, and the other, it can hold multiple view elements. So that's about layouts. And then views are the view elements that we place in layouts. So it can be divided into 6 areas according to the capabilities they offer. So for presentation purposes, you use these kind of views. For example, like label, which only presents some data. And then you get views which can initiate some command, like the buttons, which you can click and initiate some command. And then views that can set some values. For example, like this switch, like you can set true or false, values like that. And there are several other elements, so this is not an exhaustive list I'm showing here. And then entries. So entries are for editing text, like inputting some text, and indicators, like indicating there is some activity going on, like a progress bar or an activity indicator. And finally, collections, to list down collection of items. So those are the 6 areas coming under these views, or the tiniest view elements. And the next is cells. So cells is So a cell is one of these elements that come in these collections. There are 4 built-in cells that Xamarin Forms offers. Those are these. And also you can have your own custom cell. Yeah, so this is a summary of what the view controls that we just looked into. So next is navigation. So it also comes under the view layer, so we can categorize it as that. So navigation is how you transition between screens or pages. So Xamarin Forms offers a few ways of how you can transition between screens. And these are what you can see on screen. So next, we will look into the interaction between the Viewmodel and the view. So here, Xamarin Forms offers these 4 kinds of interaction capabilities, but we will focus only on binding and commanding because you can go a decent distance on developing an app only using these 2 communication protocols. So first, the data binding, that is a linking between a property in the view layer, for example, as the target, and to a property in the view model layer, ideally in the view model layer, that is the source. So any change in either of those properties will be reflected in each other, and always the binding should happen in the target. Ideally it will be in the view layer because of the communication protocols that Mvvm follows. And then commands. So binding was only to like display data and like simple data. So you can reflect them between the view model and the view. But if you want to perform some action, like trigger some action in the view model from the view, then you use commands. And commands are a type of this system Windows input I command. So using that, you can command the view model to perform some actions. So then finally, we'll look at data and services, which is this layer. So in Xamarin Forms, we will, in this session, we will look into 2 different ways where you can save and retrieve data. So the first is local data storage. So you can use files where you can, like normal C# course, you can write into a file and also then read back from that file to store data. And also you can use local databases like SQLite. So that is to store data and retrieve them in a local database. And then we can also use web services. Xamarin Forms supports these 3 types of web services to save and retrieve data. So yeah, so that will that's all of the overview that we had. So this is what we learned. What is Xamarin Forms and how to install it, and the IDs we can use, and the solution structure. And we also look into how Xamarin Forms implements this Mvvm design pattern. So that's Xamarin Forms in a nutshell. So that's all the boring theory stuff. So let's jump into some cool coding stuff. So Jonathan is waiting for a live coding session. So over to you, Jonathan.
All right. Thanks, Rizan. Let me quickly share my screen. Yeah. Yeah. So I hope you can see my screen now. So we're going to make a weather app. This is what it's going to look like at the end. At least I hope it looks like this at the end. So this is, so I'm going to show you that it's pretty easy to make UIs that look more or less nice. And I'm going to show you that it's easy to make it quickly as well. So jumping into Visual Studio for Mac, I'm going to select Blank Forms app. And let's call it my weather app. And target platforms are Android and iOS. Okay. Okay, I got my Android emulator on the right side. And the first thing I'm going to do is update Xamarin Forms, because I'll be using one or two of the new features that Xamarin has released recently. All right, that's done. Going back to what we are going to make. If you take this view, we can separate it into 4 parts. This part over here can the one with the purple background, that can be one row, you can say, and then this rectangle can be another row. This will be its own row with the 2 buttons on the right side, and this list view here, that will be its own row. Yeah, so I'll be using some of the controls that Rizan mentioned in his presentation. I'll be using some grids, stack layouts, list views, buttons, images, and labels. Yeah, let's jump into the code. So here's the main page that Rizan was talking about. Let me quickly rebuild. Oh, no, let me import some stuff first. I'm going to add some drawables. So I'm going to do the same thing for the iOS project as well. All right, just do this rebuild. I hope the font size is okay. Just shout out if the font is too small. So Rizan mentioned that usually it's 60 to 90% of shared code. In this example, we'll be having 100% of shared code. All right, it has finished building. I'm going to run this on my emulator and just format this a little bit, make it look pretty. All right, so this content is what you're seeing here on the emulator. And if I go to the app Xamarin CS real quick, you'll see that the main page has been assigned to a new instance of the main page that I'm going to be working on here. I'm just going to go delete all of this because we'll not be using that. So I mentioned that in the design that we can break it down into 4 parts. So for that, I'll be using a grid. So this is something that was released recently by Xamarin Forms. You can define your row definitions pretty easily like this. Let's go ahead and create the first row. So that would be this section of it with the hamburger menu and the title. Okay, so through the magic of hot reload, once I save any changes in the XAML file, it will get reflected on the emulator. So that's our background done. I'm going to add a stack layout, which has a horizontal orientation. And horizontal options means where you want to place it horizontally. And vertical options means where you want to place it vertically. So start means horizontally, it will be on the left side. Vertical options, start means it will be on the top. So defining margins, there's a bunch of ways you can do that. Margins and padding. So you can do it like this with two values. So that means on either side, you'll have 20 device independent pixels, and top and bottom you'll have 0. Or you can do the same thing where you say left side, top, right side, and bottom. But it's pretty much redundant to do it like that, so I'm just going to leave it like this. And yeah, let's create the hamburger menu. So at each stage, I'm just going to hit save on the file so that you'll see the changes that I'm doing on the emulator. So let's add the label that says Colombo. Okay. And give it a font size of 16. All right. Yeah. So one thing that I didn't mention is that if you have defined controls inside a grid, controls or layouts for that matter, and you haven't specified where you want to place them inside the grid, by default they will be added to the 0th row and the 0th column of the grid. So if you notice here, I've not defined anything that specifies where this image and this stack layout should be on the grid. So by default, they'll be in the 0th element, 0th row and column. Yeah, let's create another stack layout and this icon, if I can get it right. Request 50. Okay, we just added this icon. And I'm going to add the temperature and the unit. Oops. So this app will not be making use of any web services because yeah, it will take some time. So I'm just going to hard code stuff. Let's make it bold and let's make it center. All right, let's add the unit. So in order to get the degrees mark on the Mac, you just press Shift Option 8 and let's say white color. And okay, perfect. Right, so we got that part done. Let's go ahead and add the sections where it says if we have rain or not. Let's say light intensity rain. Just rained here a little while ago. Text color white. And I want it to appear in the center horizontally. There you go. And let's also add the date. October. Yeah, if I can get October right. Nope, yeah. 15, say 5 p.m. Make it a little nicer. Right. And font size 12. Oops, let's make it appear in the middle. Yeah, perfect. All right, so that's our that's the first row done. Let's go ahead and add this rectangle as well. And this component will be a frame. So I'm just going to go outside here and then define a frame. And I'm just going to say this should appear on the second row. So the grid row and column count starts from 0. So the second row would be, technically it would be 1. So yeah. Okay, and then let's say it has a shadow. So frame by default has, I think, around 6 deep padding. I just made it 0. Vertical option start. Okay. And now we can go ahead and start adding the content inside this. So I'll create another grid. And I'm going to, yeah, so I'm creating this part of it. So there's 4 columns here, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm just going to define, say, column definitions and say 4 columns. What the star mark implies is that they are going to be of equal width. So it will divide the space that it's provided with into 4 equal parts. And let's go at the first one now. Let's do a stack layout. Okay, and okay, so you can see that we have this like this. So if you notice, I added this hash shadow too. By default, Android does not have shadows for the reviews. So when I run this later on the iPhone simulator, you'll see that it has a shadow. And also, yeah, this design, I took the screenshot of an iPhone device. Okay, let's go ahead and add the values. I'll create another stack layout for it. Font size 14. Let's make it bold as well. And in the middle. Okay, that looks good. Now let's add a title for this value. It's Sri Lanka. What am I thinking? I'll just make this 80% or 90. Text color, let's make it font size 11. I want it to be small, and I also want it to be in the middle. So horizontal options center. Okay, so now I just got to make 4 of these. So due to the time constraint, I'm just going to copy it. I already have a working copy here. So okay, so if I run through what I just pasted, you can see that this first stack layout does not have any definition for where it belongs on the grid. But from that point onwards, from that point onwards, I define that it belongs to the first column, and it's more or less the same layout with a few things changed, like the image and the values and the labels. So if I hit save, yeah, looking good now. All right, so the next part that I'm going to add is this section where we can choose whether it's a list or a grid. So below the frame, I'm going to create another stack layout. And let's say that it should be on the second row of the grid. So visually, this will be on the third row of the grid. And background color transparent. So when I define the margin as 20 and just one value, it means that it'll have 20 all around, left, right, up and down. Okay, so horizontal options end means it'll appear on the right-hand side of the screen. So let me just add the 2 buttons, say source, and let's add the other one as well. Which button is source and .png. Oops. Okay, if I hit save, you can see that they've appeared here. Finally, the last control of the page, the list. So before I get to that, I'm just going to go ahead and prepare my data. So for that, I'm just going to go to the code behind. And one of the first things that I'm going to do is make this code behind the binding context. So Rizan mentioned that if we are to use Mvvm, we do data binding. And so the view needs to have some sort of object bound to it as the binding context. So I'm going to say that the binding context of this page is the code behind. Okay, and then let's make let's make a view model that would hold our data. So public class with the view model, and let's make 3 properties of 3 or 4 properties. So I'm just going to call one. See, we have the date, we have an icon, and we have the temperature. So I'm going to say public string date, and temperature. And I'm just going to do one more thing. If you remember in the presentation, you might have seen something called an I command. So an I command would be telling this view model that the view would be using this I command to perform some sort of operation. So the view will only be aware of what the command is. And the view model would be responsible for performing whatever the action that needs to be performed. I'm going to make it a read-only command. So what this command will do is basically, if when the user taps on this any of these rows, it will navigate to a new page. Yeah, so that's what I'm going to do now. Say command, and let's say show weather for day. Let's create that private method. Show weather for day. Okay. Okay. I'm going to leave it like this for now. Right, let's create a public property that we can bind to our view. Let's call it weekly weather forecast. I'll make this a read-only one as well. Get weekly. Oops, that's not how you do it. Okay, so this will return a list of weather view models. So ideally, you would probably call a service and then get this stuff from some sort of service, but yeah, I'm not going to do that for the sake of simplicity. Let me add a bunch of weather view models. So you can see I've added Sunday, Monday, and the dates, and the icon and the temperature. Let me clean this up real quick, and let's run it. All right, back to our view class. So the fourth item, the fourth row on this view is going to be a list view. Dot row. Again, it's visually the fourth row, but over here it will be the third row. Okay. Say 20 on each side, and so what has uneven by default, a list view will not measure each row as it creates them. When I say has uneven rows, it will measure each row. In our case, it's not absolutely required, but I'm just going to go and add it anyway. And here's the most important thing. I'm going to say items source, and I'm going to use this syntax to bind it to the weekly weather forecast property that I created inside my code behind. Since the code behind is the binding context, it will be looking for this public property inside that. And I'm also going to say that there is no separator. None. Okay. So I saved it, and now you can see this weird list. So what I've not done yet is create each and every row that of this list. So let's go ahead and define an item template for it. And this is some boilerplate code that you need to have inside each item template. Oops, user cannot be empty. My bad. Yeah, let's add a frame here so that we can continue to run this. Yeah, so you can see it no longer displays the type of object. Instead, it just has an empty view. So let's go ahead and make the let's make what each row looks like. Let's say background color white, and set a border color of this. So I need just 5 on the bottom. So that's why I've done it like this. And say it has no shadow. Okay. Okay, so you can see some weird looking rectangles here. That's our frame. Let's go ahead and add content into our frame. Okay, so this type of column definition would mean that I want the middle column to be utilized as and how its children, the size of its children changes. So if you add something big here, it will expand to contain that. And the 2 stars on the column definition with the 2 stars would imply that they would both have the same size, and also make use of the remaining space that the middle column has not used. Okay, so if I go back here, we have 3 public properties. So I'm going to use data binding to get the values of each of these properties inside my view. Let's create a label. So this label will have the date. So how I bind this is binding and then say date. And let's text color as that. And font size 12. Okay, we have the first row, and you can see these are the date values that I've added, and you can see them reflected on the view. So similarly, let me add the icon and image source. Let's say binding icon, and give it a width and height of 38. Okay. Okay, so the problem here is that I've forgotten to specify the column. So that's why it looks like this. It has defaulted to use the first column. So I'm going to say column. Oops. All right. Now let's go and add the temperature. So let's define a stack layout, because I'm going to have the reason I'm using a stack layout here is I'm going to have 2 different labels to hold the value and then the unit. So the unit is degree Celsius. Yeah, column 2. And make it horizontal. So adding the orientation to a stack layout means that every item that is added inside the stack layout will appear in horizontal order, as opposed to, yeah, if you have it vertical, it will appear one below the other. Let's add a margin. Oops. So 20 on the left and right. Horizontal options N. So it will appear on the right side of the screen. And vertical options center. Okay, and then let's define a label that will hold the temperature value. So I'm going to bind this to the temperature property from our view model. And let's say text color black. That's not black. Black and font size 28. Let's make it bold. Let's also make it appear in the center. Okay. All right. So yeah, these are the values that I added in my code behind. And then one more thing that we got to do is add the unit label text. So degree Celsius is shift option 8. Text color black. Font size 15, and I want it to appear in the center. Super. All right. So comparing with our design, it looks pretty much the same. Okay, so I also mentioned that tapping on one of these, I want it to go to a page where it displays, it will display the weather for that particular day. So for that, to support that, we need to do a few changes. So I showed you at the start point, we just defined a page. And that page is of type. I scroll all the way to the top. It's a content page. So if you want to do if you want to perform navigation of actions inside your app, you need the root page to be of type navigation page, or maybe a tabbed page. So for our application, we'll just make use of a navigation page, and we add our main page as a parameter in there. Okay. Let's clean that up real quick. And yeah. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say application.current.main page, and I'm going to say navigation. Yeah, navigation push async new new, what shall we call it? Yeah, weather for day page. Okay, let's go ahead and create this real quick. So all the changes that I just did, all of them are in the shared project or in the UI project that Rizan mentioned. So I didn't make any changes inside the Android and the iOS app, except for adding the icons, which are not shared, but there are a few frameworks that you can use to have shared icons. But yeah, I'm not going to go there. I added the icons to each of the platforms individually. Add new class. Forms, and let's say forms content page Xamarin. Weather for day page. Okay, here's our page. And what I'm also going to do is I'm going to pass in an instance of this view model and modify this constructor, say weather view model. Let's create a public a property, a read-only property, and let's call it weather view model. So I'm going to say weather view model is that, and then again, like I did before, I'm going to say the binding context of this page is this class. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So one more thing, we did not add how our command gets triggered. So let's go ahead and add it now. So there are several different ways you can add it. You can do it like this. You can add a gesture recognizer for the frame layout, and then say tap gesture recognizer, which is what I'm going to do now. But you also have an option of setting it to an event here, but I'm not going to use an event. I'm going to use a command instead. You also have event to command behaviors that you can create, where it converts the event into and invokes a behavior on its behalf. Yeah, let's go ahead, copy this and paste this here. Okay. Yeah, so I tapped on this row and you can see the debug point came here. I don't think it will navigate to the new page because I didn't plan it after I added the new pages. All right, let's clean this page up a bit and stop the app and run it again. So for convenience and due to the time factor, I'm just going to copy some code. You can see that a navigation bar has appeared here. Let's get rid of that in a bit. So yeah, let's also create some view models that we can use to bind in this class. Let's call it yeah, this is a terrible name to give a view model. Public string, and let's say time. Okay, let's also create a list of this today view model so that we can bind it in our view. Say list of today weather view model, and let's call it today's weather forecast, and let's make it read only and say get today's weather forecast. Get today's weather forecast. Okay, and I'll add some dummy data here. So I've added dummy data where the time for every hour from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. and I've added a bunch of temperatures. At 3 p.m. we probably don't make it out alive, but yeah, let's change it so that we survive. And then we have yeah, the icon. Okay, so the view model, our binding context is all set now. Let's go and add the view. So to save some time, I'm just going to copy the same view. All right, let me show what happens when I click. Yeah, so this is our new page. So if I click on any of these rows, it's going to navigate into the next page. Okay, let's set this up now. Quickly, that's not okay. Let's remove this, paste. Okay, let's get rid of the hamburger menu that we created. We don't need that anymore. Let's leave the title. But one additional thing I'm going to do is I'm not going to use the temperature hard-coded here. I'm going to say binding and say weather view model dot temperature. So if you remember, we passed a weather view model object from the main page to the weather for day page. So and I assigned it to a public property. So I'm going to make use of that. And I'm going to say weather view model dot temperature and save. So if I click on this, I should see 28 instead. Yeah, I see 28. And if I click on Saturday, it should be 32. Cool. Yeah. And let's make a bunch of other changes as well. Yeah, let's remove this as well. And let's say binding with Viewmodel.date. So I want these dates to appear as well. So Sunday 11 should, when I click on that, it should say Sunday 11. And yeah, great. I'm not going to do any changes here because yeah, I've not really added any modules for it. Yeah, going back to our list view. So our list view, if you see here, nothing appears because we don't have this weekly weather forecast item source in our new page. So let's go ahead and change that to today's weather forecast. And also let's make some, yeah, we don't need the tab gesture recognizer anymore because we're not going anywhere with the tabs. Let's change this to time because we know we only have, we have a time, a temperature, and an icon. So let's change it to time, and we have the icon and the temperature. All right, and I hit save. Nothing happened. Why is that? Let's see. Clearly I'm doing something wrong. Yeah. Okay, let me go change a few things up first. So let's add a title to this page. Let's call it today's weather. Yeah, nice. Can anyone spot what I'm doing wrong? Okay. And I mentioned that I'm going to hide this navigation bar. So let's go ahead and do that right now. It's pretty easy. Just one line of code where we say navigation page that has navigation bar false. All right, that's sorted. Just give me a moment. I'll see why this doesn't work. Oh, there we go. So I copied the list. I probably made a mistake when I was, yeah, copy paste mistake probably. So here it is now. I just pasted this section from my working copy. Yeah, there you go. You've learned how to navigate from one page to another, but how you can utilize a command in a view model. And yeah, there you go, your first Xamarin Forms app. and it was pretty easy. We have utilized 100% of shared code, and yeah, this looks pretty nice. I'm going to run it on the iOS simulator as well. Okay, so that's more or less the end of my code session. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah. Just a moment while I show you the iPhone app. Almost there. There we go. Yeah. So like I mentioned, this frame has a shadow now. It didn't have a shadow in the Android app. But yeah, so that's how I use Xamarin Forms to make this really basic app with pretty good looking UI, if I say so myself. Yeah, navigates, you have the title, you have no title on the first page. Yeah, you can fix this as well. It's a tiny fix, but due to the time constraint, I'm going to stop now. So I guess nobody has any questions. I'm going to hand it over to Kanchana to wind things up.
Hi, Jonathan. This I'm Rizan. Jonathan, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, one general question. So, if you need to implement a application, mobile application from the scratch, what are the pros and cons of using Xamarin Forms rather than using any other language? I mean, like Flutter or Native.
The biggest plus point that I've seen in the project that I'm working in is that we have view models and models. Sorry, not view models. Just we have models and contracts defined that we reuse on the server code as well. So we have a shared contracts library where it's a net standard to shared projects. So we can use it. We can refer it in the mobile code and the server code as well. I see that as a huge plus point. Rizan, you got any pointers?
You are muted, Rizan.
Rizan, you are on mute. Okay, now okay.
Yeah, sure. So as I had mentioned in the presentation, these are some of the main key areas for using Xamarin Forms or other frameworks. So mainly for .NET developers, they can use the .NET knowledge that they know. Personally, I haven't used Flutter, so I have heard that Flutter also helps you share code because it's a cross-platform app. What I see as .NET developer is that you can use .NET for developing these apps. And unlike Flutter, Xamarin has been maturing for a long time. I think since 2015 or so. Flutter just came into picture recently. So Xamarin is a broad area. It covers a really broad area at the moment. So I think those things stand out really good. So here we can't really compare Flutter to Xamarin, but Xamarin has its own benefits, and the main benefit I can talk about is the use of .NET for .NET developers, so they don't need to focus on other technologies to start developing mobile apps. and also you get this native performance and real native apps. Yeah. So what did it answer your question? I think we lost our questioner. So any other questions you got?
Anyone has any questions for Jonathan or Rizan?
Yes, Jonathan. Another thing, if you want to know. So I heard that in the next year, Xamarin Forms is going to transform to a new version called multi-platform UI kind of thing. So will it be feasible? I mean, the current code. Do you know any idea or anything about it?
Yeah, there was something that unleashed, but I haven't tried it yet. So, Jonathan, what about you?
Do you mean shell? I'm not really sure. I'm aware of it.
All right.
Yeah, so any other questions?
Yeah, if there is there's any other question, I don't think there's any other questions. And thank you, Jonathan and Rizan, for a very informative and interesting session. Okay, thank you everybody for participating, and we'll meet in another session pretty soon. Thank you.
Thank you.